So you and I, we're about to go on a little adventure together. That adventure is going to span 118 years of tutors, and it's going to be one generation at a time. How does that sound to you? I'll be your host this evening. My name is Christina. Thank you for joining us here at my Tudor Era Tapestry. In the early spring of 1485, a gentle light filtered through the stone arches. Eliza, 19 and radiant, paused in her chamber, her reflection caught in a polished bronze mirror. The scent of lavender and cold stone lingered, a soft counterpoint to the weight of her Yorkist blood. Daughter of King Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville, whose beauty she carried in the golden cascade of her hair, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. The pale, almost translucent glow of her skin touched with a faint flush at her cheeks. Her eyes, a clear blue-gray that held quiet depth, mirroring the skies over Yorkshire. Her demeanor was a tapestry of poise and restraint. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying the cadence of a courtier's daughter, tempered by a warmth that endeared her to maids and guards alike. Yet beneath her complex exterior, Eliza's heart pulsed with a restless tide. Hope for peace, fear of what Richard III or the unseen Henry Tudor might demand, and a quiet grief for her family's fractured past. She smiled readily, her lips curving with a gentleness that masked her resolve. But her eyes betrayed moments of doubt, flickering when talk of marriage or battle reached her ears. In the chapel, she prayed for England's healing, her rosary beads a rhythm of endurance. Eliza, in her quiet exile, carried herself as a queen unborn, her beauty a beacon, her demeanor a shield. The eldest daughter of King Edward IV, she was a rose caught in the thorns of England's civil strife. The realm teetered on the edge of chaos as Richard III, her uncle, sat uneasily on the throne, his claim shadowed by whispers of her missing brothers, the princes in the Tower. Eliza's brother's disappearance was an unsolved mystery. They had been placed in the Tower of London by their uncle Richard for their safety. And then they had just vanished, never to be seen again. Some say it was Richard. Some say it was a frame job. Below, the castle courtyard bustled with servants and men-at-arms, their hurried steps betraying the tension that gripped the north. Eliza's fingers traced the edge of a small, worn prayer book, its pages soft from years of her mother's touch. Elizabeth, the Dowager Queen, had sent her daughter north for safety, but safety was a fleeting thing in a land where crowns were won with steel. The news from the south was grim. Henry Tudor, the Lancastrian exile, had landed with a ragtag army. His claim to the throne, bold but untested. Eliza's heart stirred with conflicting tides. Her Yorkist blood bound her to the house of her father, yet Richard's reign was dogged by suspicion and rebellion. In the weeks before Bosworth, Eliza's world shrank to whispers and waiting. Messengers brought tales of gathering armies, Henry's growing as he marched through Wales. She heard her uncle's fierce resolve. Eliza was no mere pawn, but a symbol herself, her hand in marriage a prize that could sway nobles to either side. Yet she was powerless to act, confined to prayers and the flickering of hope that her brothers, Edward and Richard, might yet live. Eliza's days were a quiet vigil, her moments watched by Richard's men. She had been branded illegitimate, and it stung like a wound. Yet rumors swirled that Richard, widowed since March of 1485, might wed her to secure his throne, a prospect that chilled her. Her uncle's dark gaze, once familial, now carried a possessiveness she recoiled from. After emerging from sanctuary at Westminster Abbey, where she and her family had sought refuge following her father's death and Richard's seizure of the throne, her status was ambiguous. A potential threat to Richard's reign due to her strong claim to the throne as Edward IV's heir, yet also a valuable asset for consolidating his rule. Eliza's daily life was shaped by the constraints of Richard's court, where she was treated with the deference due a highborn lady, but kept under close supervision to prevent her from becoming a rallying point for the Yorkist or Lancastrian rebels. Mornings began with prayers in a private chapel, She was attended by a small retinue of ladies-in-waiting, spies carefully chosen by Richard's administration to ensure loyalty. Her days were filled with activities befitting her rank: needlework, reading, devotional texts, and music, as the Yorkist court valued cultural refinement. Meals were taken in the great hall, or a private chamber surrounded by Richard's courtiers, where she would have been served rich dishes like roasted meat, spiced wine, and delicate pastries, though always under the scrutiny of those reporting to the king. Her interactions were tightly controlled. Correspondence with her mother Elizabeth or other relatives was monitored. As Richard sought to suppress any plotting that could leverage Eliza's claim to the throne, rumors swirled about Richard's intentions toward her. The atmosphere was one of quiet tension, far from London's political heart and isolating her from potential allies. She walked its cold stone corridors, gazing out over the Yorkshire moors, aware of the growing unrest in the realm. Whispers of Henry Tudor's planned invasion from France likely reached her, though she had little freedom to act on such knowledge. Her brothers, the princes in the Tower, were presumed dead by this point, leaving her as the surviving symbol of the Yorkist legitimacy. Eliza's thoughts often turned to her uncertain future. She spent hours in prayer or reflection, grappling with her precarious position as a pawn in a dynastic struggle, and the approaching battle of Bosworth Field. Her daily routine, structured, controlled, and outwardly serene, belied the undercurrent of fear and hope that defined her existence as Richard's grip on her power weakened, and Henry Tudor's forces gathered across the Channel. The alternative was Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian exile. He stirred a different unease. Eliza knew little of him, save his claim through his mother's line and his vow to marry her if he triumphed, a pledge that reached Eliza through smuggled letters from Yorkist allies. The idea of wedding a stranger, his red rose a rival to her white, sparked both curiosity and caution. Could such a marriage heal the wars that had bled her family, uniting York and Lancaster as her father's dream had faltered? Or would it bind her to a victor who saw her only as a prize, her Yorkist heart a trophy for his crown? She prayed in the castle's chapel, her rosary beads whispering for a king who would honor her, not merely claim her. Margaret Beaufort's name, tied to Henry Tudor, reached Eliza's ears. Margaret's ambition was to force Eliza to marry her son. Her ambition, a force Eliza respected, yet feared, knowing the Tudor matriarch's son might reshape her fate. Her cousin Maggie, a child under Clarence's tainted legacy, was a distant figure, her Yorkist blood a faint echo of Eliza's own, too young to share this burden. The court of Richard III buzzed with preparations for battle, while Eliza waited, isolated. As August 1485 drew near, Eliza's thoughts turned to Bosworth, where steel would decide her path. She pictured her father's golden reign, now a memory, and her brother's laughter, now silent, her resolve hardening to survive for them. Marrying the victor, whether Henry's hope or Richard's shadow, was a duty she would bear. On the eve of the battle, as August heat gave way to restless dusk, Eliza stood alone. She wondered if the morrow would bring glory or only more graves. The clash at Bosworth Field, she knew, would decide not just the fate of kings, but her own, whether she would be a queen to heal a fractured realm or a footnote in its ruins. The January frost glittered the windows of Westminster Palace as Eliza stood in her chamber on the morning of her wedding. Her gown of cloth of gold shimmered, its heavy folds a testament to her new role as Henry VII's queen. Beneath her smile, Eliza harbored a secret. She was pregnant, the first stirrings of life already knitting within her. Elizabeth's appearance was a vision of royal grace, her tall, slender frame carrying the elegance of her father, Edward IV, her features softened by her mother Elizabeth's famed beauty. Her gown's gold thread shimmered with each step, the white roses a defiant nod to her lineage. Her demeanor was poised, her smile serene as she moved through the ceremony, her voice steady as she spoke her vows, yet her hands clasped tightly betrayed a tremor of doubt. The court saw a princess reborn, but within, Elizabeth wrestled with a heart torn by joy and sorrow, her marriage a bridge between warring houses that carried the weight of her past. Elizabeth was not among the crowd, her absence a silent pang, though her letters urged Eliza to embrace this union for England's sake. The marriage, long promised since Henry's exile, was a triumph of peace, yet it stirred complicated feelings. Gratitude for her restored honor, but wariness of Henry, whose calculating gaze spoke more of strategy than love. Would he cherish her as a partner, or see her only as a Yorkist prize to secure his crown? The red and white roses, entwined in the chapel's garlands, promised unity, but Eliza wondered if her heart could truly blend with his. Margaret, Henry's mother, stood near, her sharp eyes softened by the day's promise. Her ambition a force, Eliza felt like a tide, both ally and enigma. Her cousin Maggie, 12, was a distant figure, too young to attend, but a reminder of Yorkist blood enduring in the shadows. The court, alive with cheers for the new Tudor dynasty, celebrated a union that ended decades of war, but Elizabeth's joy was tempered by the cost. Her father's golden reign gone, her brother's laughter silenced, her only role a delicate balance of duty and desire. As Henry took her hand, his touch firm yet unfamiliar, Elizabeth's smile held steady. Her roses avowed to forge a future in this fragile peace. Eliza stepped into her queenship, her heart a tapestry of hope and loss. Her wedding a moment where love and duty danced amid the thorns of a new dawn. The marriage, orchestrated by her mother, Elizabeth, and Henry's mother, Margaret, was a political triumph. But the child she carried, conceived in the weeks before the wedding, promised a dynasty. Her heart fluttered with both joy and unease, knowing that the child must be born strong to cement the fragile peace. Henry was crowned king 3 months prior. Eliza, her golden hair veiled beneath a jeweled circlet, felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. Nobles, clergy, and commoners, watching as she pledged her vows. Her pregnancy, known only to her closest ladies, added urgency to the union. The realm needed an heir, and Eliza, as York's heiress, carried out the hopes of both houses. She prayed silently for a son, her hands trembling as she clasped Henry's, the cold metal of his ring a reminder of their shared duty. As spring unfolded, Eliza's pregnancy became evident. Her gowns loosened to accommodate her growing belly. She withdrew to Westminster, chosen for its ancient ties to King Arthur's legend, a nod to Henry's desire to cloak his reign in mythic glory. The court buzzed with anticipation, but Eliza's days were quieter. She read romances and prayed in the cathedral, her mother's letters urging her to rest. While Margaret sent physicians to ensure the child's health, Eliza felt the child's first kicks in May, a fierce private joy that tempered her fears of childbirth, a peril she knew too well from her mother's losses. The ghosts of her brothers, the princes in the tower, lingered in her thoughts, but she focused on the life within her, a bridge between past and future. By late summer, her confinement began. The chamber, sealed with rich hangings and warmed by a constant fire. Eliza, heavy with child, rested in the dim seclusion of her confinement chamber as she awaited the birth of her first child. Eliza's appearance, softened by pregnancy, bore the grace of her lineage, her tall frame now rounded, her pale skin warmed by a delicate flush, her hands resting gently on her swollen belly, feeling the stir of life within her. The confinement chamber, rich with velvet cushions and silver candelabras, was a world of women. Her ladies, led by her mother-in-law Margaret, tended her with quiet efficiency, their whispers a hum of prayers and preparations. Eliza's demeanor was calm, her smile a beacon for her attendants, yet her heart pulsed with a tangle of emotions: hope for her son to secure Henry's throne, fear for the perils of childbirth, and quiet grief for the family she had lost. Her days in confinement were a rhythm of rest and reflection. Her body, weary from the weight of pregnancy, her legs aching from limited movement, she stitched a tiny cap with roses, each thread a prayer for her child's strength, her thoughts drifting to her mother, Elizabeth, whose letters offered love but no presence, a distance that stung. Margaret, ever vigilant, visited daily, though her intensity reminded Eliza of the crown's demands. The birth, expected in September, was a beacon for England, a proof of unity after Bosworth's blood, but Eliza felt the weight of expectation. Her child must live, must thrive, to silence whispers of Yorkist rivals. Her cousin Maggie was a distant Yorkist echo, too young to share this vigil in the chapel's hush. Eliza prayed, her rosary beads a plea for safety. In September, after a labor both painful and mercifully swift, Eliza gave birth to a son named Arthur in homage to the legendary king. The infant's cries echoed through Winchester's halls, a signal of Tudor legitimacy. Eliza, exhausted but radiant, cradled him, his tiny fingers curling around hers. Henry, summoned from London, arrived to see his heir, his stern face softening briefly. Church bells rang across the city and bonfires blazed in the streets, though Eliza knew the murmurs of the Yorkist discontent still simmered. The boy, born 8 months after the wedding, was proof of the Tudor-York unity, his existence silencing doubters who questioned Henry's claim. For now, she was a mother and a queen, her love for Arthur a quiet vow to protect the fragile dynasty she had helped create. On a crisp November morning in 1487, Queen Eliza stood beneath the soaring arches of Westminster Abbey. Her tall, slender frame moved with a grace that stilled whispers, her cloth of gold gown shimmering as if woven from the sun itself. Eliza was no mere ornament, but a rose entwining York and Tudor. At 21, her beauty was a quiet storm. Her tall, slender frame, draped in cloth of gold that gleamed like a promise, moved with the elegance of a king's daughter. Each step a measured dance through a realm still raw from war. Eliza's coronation was a tapestry of hope woven with thorns. The crowd's cheers rose up like a tide through London's frost-kissed streets, yet shadows lingered. Yorkists whispered of Lambert Simnel, a pretender crowned in Dublin, as Archbishop John Morton anointed her, her delicate hands clasped briefly as if holding her father's dream of a healed England. Her voice clear, yet warm, greeted nobles and maids alike. Eliza's thoughts flickered to her son, Arthur, born a year past, his tiny hands a thread tying her to this new dynasty. She stood, not just as queen, but as a beacon, her beauty a vow, her heart a prayer for peace. Her coronation a fragile step toward a realm where roses, red and white, might bloom as one. Her coronation was resplendent, but her role was clear: to bear heirs, to bind wounds, to be the queen her father's dream had demanded. Her son Arthur was already a golden thread in the Tudor weave, his infant laughter a promise of stability. Yet her eyes, soft but searching, flickered with the knowledge that her Yorkist blood made her both a savior and a threat, watched by Henry's wary court. Eliza's days unfolded in the quiet splendor of Greenwich and Sheen, their halls warmed by tapestries and the murmur of lutes. Her voice, clear as a bell, yet softened by warmth, greeted courtiers and maids alike. Her smile, a gentle shield, masking the weight of her crown. Henry, ever mindful of her lineage, kept her influence tethered, her role more ceremonial than commanding. She poured her heart into piety, her rosary beads a rhythm of solace, her offerings to abbeys a prayer for peace. At court she glided through feasts and progresses, her golden hair catching candlelight, her laughter a melody that eased the tension of a dynasty still young. Yet whispers of a rebellion followed her beauty a magnet for both loyalty and danger. In private, Eliza's thoughts turned to her mother, Elizabeth, now in seclusion, and to her cousin Maggie, a child bearing her shadowed name. Her own family grew, her love for Arthur a fierce, quiet flame. By late 1489, her body carried another hope, her pregnancy a whispered prayer for the Tudor line. The court watched, its breath held, knowing each child wove the dynasty tighter. On November 28, in Westminster's hushed chambers, Eliza labored beneath velvet and candlelight, her delicate hands gripping the bed's edge as midwives murmured encouragement. A daughter emerged, Margaret, her cries a new note in the Tudor song. The babe's arrival sparked joy, though a daughter's worth lay in alliances yet to come. The name was no mere whim. It honored Henry's formidable mother, Margaret Beaufort, the steely matriarch whose Lancastrian blood and unyielding ambition had carved the path to Bosworth's victory. Eliza saw in her daughter's name a bridge, not just between York and Tudor, but to the women whose prayers and plotting had crowned her husband king. Margaret, with her sharp mind and devout heart, was a towering presence, her influence a constant pulse in Henry's court. Naming Meg for her grandmother was a nod to that strength, a vow that this child would carry the weight of both houses into a future where alliances might heal England's scars. As she traced Meg's tiny fingers, Eliza's smile held a flicker of hope, her heart weaving prayers for her daughter to inherit not just her grandmother's name, but her resilience, to bloom in a realm still shadowed by its past. Meg's birth was a thread of light in a realm still filled with thorns. Eliza saw in her daughter a future where York and Tudor might truly blend. The jousts and feasts that followed were a fleeting glory. But Eliza's thoughts lingered on her children, on the brothers she had lost, on the fragile peace she had carried like a prayer book. As queen, mother, and symbol, she walked her path with grace, her beauty a beacon, her heart a shield, her legacy blooming in the tiny hands of Meg. The air was thick with the promise of new life, mingling in the faint tang of wood smoke from the hearth. As Greenwich stone halls hummed with quiet anticipation of a court, awaiting a second Tudor heir. As June's warmth deepened, Eliza's confinement drew near, the court's anticipation swelling with her. On June 28, 1491, in the stifling intimacy of her lying-in chamber at Greenwich, she labored beneath velvet hangings. After hours of effort, a son was born. Henry, a robust babe with his father's eyes and a booming cry that echoed through the palace. The court erupted in joy. Jousts and feasts planned to herald the spare heir. Named for his father and the Lancastrian legacy, Eliza, exhausted, cradled the boy, her golden hair damp against her brow, her heart swelling as she traced his tiny features. Seeing in them a promise of strength, the new baby smell clung to him. In the days that followed, Eliza rested in her chamber, its windows emitting the soft hum of summer, while Henry's birth was celebrated with wine and song. Her cousin Maggie, newlywed, visited her, her own Yorkist heart a quiet echo of Eliza's. Eliza's thoughts, though, lingered on her mother, whose hope for her lost sons flickered with Warbeck's name. As she held Henry, her fingers brushing his downy hair, Eliza's smile held a fierce resolve. Her children were her answer to the realm's thorns, their lives a vow to heal England's scars. In the nursery's warmth, with Meg toddling nearby, Eliza's heart was a vigil, her beauty a beacon, her love a shield for a dynasty still blooming amid the whispers of a fractured past. In the quiet of the nursery, where Eliza's life wove fragile peace, the world beyond pressed its weight. Her children's laughter held the presence of a unified realm, yet the specter of unrest lingered like a shadow across the cradle. As she turned from Henry's soft breaths to the memory of Arthur's investiture, Eliza's thoughts hardened. Her son's knighthood was a triumph, but the whispers of Warbeck's claim stirred doubts that even a mother's resolve could not fully silence. Arthur, now a solemn boy, knighted in the Order of the Garter just months ago at Windsor's St. George's Chapel. She had watched him, small, in his green and gold robes, his earnest steps a vow of Tudor legitimacy. Her heart swelling as nobles cheered the heir who bound York and Lancaster. Arthur's investiture, orchestrated by Henry and Margaret, had been a shield against Yorkist unrest. Yet Warbeck's claim threatened to pierce it. If Richard lived, his rightful claim as Edward IV's son could rally disaffected lords, casting Arthur as a usurper's heir in their eyes. The Spanish alliance, whispered in council for Arthur's future, might falter if Warbeck's rebellion gained ground, and Eliza's son could face a realm divided once more. The thought chilled her, her hands tightening on a locket, its cold metal a reminder of the brothers whose fate still haunted her queenship. As a mother, her loyalty was to Henry and Arthur, yet her heart yearned for her brother's survival. She had written to her mother, Elizabeth, seeking counsel, but her reply was cautious, urging Eliza to protect her children, while hinting at her own inquiries into Warbeck's truth. Margaret, ever vigilant, loomed in Eliza's thoughts, her sharp gaze a reminder that any sympathy for Warbeck could brand her disloyal, threatening Arthur, Meg, and baby Henry's future. Eliza's cousin Maggie was a quieter echo of Yorkist blood, her marriage a Tudor leash that mirrored Eliza's own delicate balance. The court, still buzzing from Arthur's garter ceremony, celebrated a dynasty Eliza helped forge, but Warbeck's shadow cast doubt on its roots. In the sultry late summer of 1492, Queen Eliza rested in her richly appointed chambers at Westminster Palace. The air hung heavy with the scent of beeswax candles, their golden flicker casting intricate shadows across the tapestries of mythic beasts and blooming vines that adorned the stone walls. The faint perfume of roses drifted upward from the palace gardens, mingling with the musk of polished oak and the crisp linen of her bed. At 26, Eliza's golden hair, loosely braided beneath a linen coif, framed a face that bore the serene beauty of her Yorkist lineage. On September 7, she gave birth to her fourth child, a daughter named Elizabeth in honor of her late mother, Elizabeth Woodville, a delicate infant whose arrival sent ripples of celebration through the Tudor court. Westminster buzzed with the energy of a dynasty cementing its claim. King Henry, Eliza's husband, marked the birth with lavish feasts in the Great Hall, where minstrels played and courtiers toasted the new princess. Bells rang out across London, their joyous clamor echoing from St. Paul's to the distant villages along the Thames. Yet within the Queen's chambers, a quieter scene unfolded. Eliza, clad in a loose gown of soft green damask to ease her discomfort of recovery, sat propped against a mound of embroidered pillows, her gaze fixed on the cradle beside her bed. The cradle, carved from oak and draped with crimson velvet, fringed in gold, held little Elizabeth, swaddled in cloth of gold that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. The babe was small, her cheeks pale, but touched with a faint flush, her tiny fingers curling like rose petals. Eliza's heart swelled with a fierce, tender love, yet a thread of concern wove through her joy. Little Elizabeth's cries were faint, her breathing uneven, stirring a mother's instinct honed by the trails of a turbulent childhood. The Wars of the Roses, that brutal contest for England's crown, had left deep scars on Eliza's soul. Her father, King Edward, had died when she was 17, plunging her family into chaos. Her brothers, Edward and Richard, the princes in the Tower, had vanished, their fates shrouded in whispers of murder that haunted her still. Those losses had taught her the fragility of life, even in royal cradles. And now, as she watched her daughter's chest rise and fall, she whispered a prayer to the Virgin Mary. Her fingers brushed a silvery rosary, its beads cool against her skin, each one a plea for the health and strength of her child, in a court where every heir was a shield against rebellion. The christening was a spectacle of Tudor triumph. The chapel's vaulted ceiling, painted with stars, gleamed under the light of 100 candles. The font, draped in cloth of silver and ready to receive the princess, who was carried by her godmother and grandmother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, Henry's very serious mother. Courtiers in silks and velvets filled the pew, their murmurs hushed as the Archbishop of Canterbury anointed the infant with holy oil. Little Elizabeth, wrapped in a mantle of ermine, stirred faintly, her cry swallowed by the swell of a choir. The ceremony was a declaration of dynastic strength, the Tudor rose emblazoned on banners and the court's collective imagination. Eliza's chambers became a hub of quiet activity as she received visitors. Ladies of the court, their gowns rustling, presented gifts of embroidered linens and silver rattles for the princess. Diplomats, their voices low, brought news of a Genoese sailor, Christopher Columbus, whose voyage under Spain's flag stirred talk of new worlds across the sea. Eliza listened graciously, her hands folded in her lap, but her mind remained with her daughter. The nursery, a warm, fire-lit chamber overseen by a trusted wet nurse and guided by local attendants, became her sanctuary, where she spent hours, her fingers tracing the soft, downy hair on little Elizabeth's head, willing her to grow strong. She ordered a reliquary of St. Margaret, patron saint of childbirth, placed near the cradle, its gold casing glinting in the firelight, a talisman against the specter of loss that loomed in her memory. Her own mother had lost children, and Eliza had seen too many royal infants fade, despite prayers and physicians. Her elder children brought moments of lightness to her vigil. Meg, 3, and Harry, just a year old, were brought by their nurses. Yet it was little Elizabeth's quiet presence that anchored her, a reminder of the dynasty's hopes, resting in a fragile frame. The court's joy was tempered for Eliza by the memory of her own losses and the whispers of those who still viewed Henry's crown as contested. Her friendship with her cousin Maggie Pole offered solace against the intrigues. Maggie shared Eliza's Yorkist roots and understood the weight of their shared history. On a quiet afternoon, as rain pattered against the leaded windows, Maggie sat with Eliza in the nursery, her nimble fingers embroidering a tiny cap for the princess. Eliza clung to that hope, her lips curving in a faint smile. Maggie's presence was a refuge, her loyalty a reminder that not all of Eliza's family were lost to war or suspicion. In the late autumn of 1494, frost draped the gardens of Westminster Palace like a silver mantle. Queen Eliza, now 28, sat by a firelit window in her private chamber, the glow casting flickering shadows on her sapphire gown. Her fingers, steady but tender, traced the delicate script on a letter from her cousin Maggie. The missive announced the birth of Maggie's second son, Arthur, named in homage to Elizabeth's son, Prince Arthur, the 8-year-old heir to the Tudor throne, whose solemn eyes already bore the weight of a kingdom's hope. The news warmed Eliza's heart, a flicker of joy piercing the suspicion that cloaked King Henry's court like a fog rolling in off the Thames. Eliza penned her reply, her quill gliding across the parchment with measured grace, words brimming with warmth for Maggie's growing family, yet tempered by caution, mindful of the spies who might intercept her words. Her thoughts lingering on Maggie, exiled in the quiet halls of Bisham Manor, stitching loyalty into a life under scrutiny, her every action weighed across her royal lineage. When young Harry, her second son, was invested Duke of York, Eliza bore the moment with quiet poignancy. The title, bestowed on the 3-year-old, echoed a past steeped in loss. Her brothers, Edward and Richard, vanished from the Tower a decade prior, had once held the titles of heir and second son. Now those same honors adorned her own sons, Arthur and Henry. The weight of their absence mingled with a mother's pride as Eliza watched her son, clad in robes of state, claim a legacy that bound her bloodline to a throne forged from strife, knitting old wounds with new hope. As winter tightened its grip, the Thames icing at its edges, and the court's tension deepened with whispers of treachery closer to home, Sir William Stanley, the brother to Eliza's father-in-law, Lord Thomas Stanley, you may remember him from the Battle of Bosworth Field. Remember, who's going to win? And at the last second, Sir William Stanley declared for King Henry. He was the hero of Bosworth, whose cavalry charge had tipped the battle for King Henry, and he stood accused of conspiring with agents of Perkin Warbeck, the pretender who claimed to be Eliza's long-lost brother Richard, Duke of York. Will's jovial presence and his booming laugh at feasts, his gifts of crimson ribbons to their daughter Meg, his tales of battle shared over goblets of spiced wine, was missed. Eliza felt a pang of disbelief, his betrayal a crack in the fragile trust binding the Tudor regime. The accusation stung all the more for its intimacy. Stanley had dined at her table, jested with her children, and sworn fealty to her husband. Warbeck's shadow, looming from abroad, had grown darker since the death of Eliza's mother Elizabeth in 1492, a loss that still ached like a bruise beneath her composed exterior. Margaret, my lady the king's mother, pressed for swift action against Stanley, her brother-in-law. Her spies, ever vigilant, had uncovered letters where he had pledged aid to Warbeck's cause, should the pretender's claim prove to be true, a conditional treason that cut no less deeply. Eliza, torn between loyalty to her husband and sorrow for the man she had called family, stood poised between duty and grief, her heart a battleground of conflicting loyalties. As the court buzzed around her, Eliza maintained her queenly duties, her smile a practiced shield. She walked the halls with grace, her sapphire gown catching the torchlight, pausing to speak softly to her children. Margaret, ever present, counseled vigilance, her piety as unyielding as her ambition for the Tudor dynasty. Yet Eliza, in private moments, recalled Stanley's kindness, how he had carved a tiny horse for Meg, how he had toasted her health at the Christmas feast, making his fall all the more bitter. In February 1495, the court held its breath as Sir William Stanley faced trial for treason in a chamber heavy with the weight of judgment. Eliza, at Westminster, hosted a small banquet to soothe nervous nobles, her laughter a delicate note that belied the storm within. She poured wine for lords, her sapphire gown shimmering under torchlight, her hands steady, though her thoughts lingered on Stanley's fate. On February 16, a somber messenger arrived, his cloak dusted with snow, bearing word. Stanley's head had fallen at Tower Hill, his execution a stark spectacle to deter Warbeck's supporters and silence Yorkist whispers. The news struck Eliza like a winter gust. She retreated to her chamber, the fire's glow dim against her sorrow, its crackle unable to warm the chill in her bones. Her fingers gripped a rosary, its beads worn smooth by years of prayer. As she knelt before a small altar, adorned with a silver crucifix and a single white rose, beseeching protection for her children and mercy for a man whose ambitions had undone him, Eliza wrote to Maggie, whose Arthur's birth had been a hopeful mark months before, urging her cousin to remain steadfast in a court now bristling with suspicion. Eliza's letter was careful, its warmth veiled in formality to protect them both from prying eyes. Yet she enclosed a small silver rattle for young Arthur, its chime a token of shared hope, a reminder of a bond that endured despite the court's divisions. In the winter of 1495, as Sheen Palace stood cloaked in the crystalline shroud of frost, its turrets glistening like polished silver under a pale sky, Elizabeth sat in a fire-lit hearth, the crackle of cedar logs filling the air. Her carved oak chair, cushioned with embroidered velvet, cradled her weary frame. At 30, her beauty was tempered by grief's quiet weight, her heart heavy with mourning for her husband's uncle Jasper Tudor, Duke of Bedford, whose death in December had carved a void in the Tudor court. Jasper, her Aunt Catherine Woodville's husband and King Henry VII's uncle, had been a pillar of loyalty, raising King Henry in exile and wielding his sword at Bosworth in 1485 to secure the crown. His gentle tales of chivalry had captivated her children, their eyes wide in the nursery's glow. He had been the closest thing to a grandfather her children had known. His passing, following the September death of her 3-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth, whose laughter once danced through the halls, left Eliza's chest hollow, a silent tide of grief beneath her serene facade. Jasper's role as Lord High Steward was taken over by Edward Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, Jasper's stepson and Eliza's cousin, whose new prominence stirred the court's delicate balance. As the Queen's cousin, raised by the same man as the King had been since the age of 7, he was a safe choice. In the nursery, Eliza guided 6-year-old Meg's hands in embroidering crimson roses, the Tudor emblem, while 15-year-old Elizabeth Howard, a young lady-in-waiting whose keen eyes and quiet grace brought gentle warmth to the chamber, adjusted threads with a deft touch. Arthur, 9, studied Latin nearby, his brow bent over Cicero, while 4-year-old Henry chased shadows with a mischievous spark. The court, reeling from Perkin Warbeck's failed invasion, buzzed with unease. The nobles, whispering of the pretender's claim to be Eliza's lost brother Richard, a spectre haunting her dreams. Eliza shielded her children, her voice soothing as she hosted gatherings in the great hall, a tender counterpoint to her mother-in-law Margaret Beaufort's stern vigilance. Elizabeth Howard, ever attentive, moved gracefully among the guests, her loyalty a quiet support to Eliza's diplomacy, learned from her mother, who had been lady-in-waiting to 2 queens, Elizabeth Woodville and Anne Neville. And that had been an awkward transition. As frost yielded to buds, Eliza discovered that she was with child, a quiet joy tempered by childbirth's perils and the court's unrest. The pregnancy stirred hope for another heir, yet carried the bitter-sweet weight of little Elizabeth's loss, her golden-haired daughter, whose tiny hands once clutched Eliza's fingers, a shadow in the nursery's warmth. When Mary was born, swaddled in cloth of gold and baptized in the church of the observant friars, Eliza gazed into her cradle, her heart tangled with love and sorrow. Mary's coos and bright eyes, so like her sister's, sparked a tenderness and piercing grief, a gift and a reminder. In quiet moments, Eliza traced Mary's features, her fingers trembling, her chapel prayers pleading for strength to love without fear. Eliza confided in Margaret Beaufort, whose fervent prayers entrusted physicians, their robes, heavy with chamomile and rosehip, enveloped her in care. In a candlelit chamber draped with green damask, Eliza penned letters to her cousin Maggie Pole, sharing news of her pregnancy and Mary's birth. Cautious words on vellum, mindful of Harry's spies and Warbeck's rebellion festering in Scotland. Eliza's letters spoke of hope for Mary, and shared grief for little Elizabeth and Maggie's brother Edward, confined in the Tower, their bond a quiet defiance. As winter softened into spring, Eliza's strength wavered, her body weary, yet her spirit turned steadfast, fueled by Mary's health and the dynasty's future. She strolled Sheen's gardens, the scent of budding roses evoking her mother's counsel to nurture peace through love. Mary's tiny hand, grasping her finger, anchored Eliza to hope, though each smile echoed little Elizabeth's laughter, a bittersweet resolve that Eliza bore, her love for her living children a vow to shield them from the shadows of loss and rebellion. In the waning months of 1497, as Richmond Palace stood cloaked in the mists of late autumn, the Thames mirroring the sky, heavy with clouds, Queen Eliza moved through the halls with quiet grace, her hair catching the flicker of torchlight, her gown brushing against the rushes. At 31, her beauty was tempered by the weight of queenship and the fresh sting of Perkin Warbeck's rebellion. Its collapse in October a fragile reprieve for the Tudor crown. The air carried November's chill and the scent of wood smoke, mingling with the waxen glow of candles in her privy chamber, where she sat with her embroidery, her needle pausing as her thoughts churned. Warbeck, the pretender, claiming to be her lost brother Richard, now in house arrest at court, his confession as a Fleming, a weaver's son, not a Yorkist prince, ringing hollow against the wounds of her past. Among her ladies, Elizabeth Howard, a sprightly 17-year-old lady-in-waiting, brought a youthful warmth to the chamber, her nimble fingers adjusting Eliza's embroidery frame with a shy smile, her presence a quiet comfort amidst the court's tensions. Nearby, Thomas Boleyn, a new face at court at 20, lingered on the edges of the hall, his sharp eyes and polished Kent manners marking him as an ambitious newcomer. His recent service against Cornish rebels earning him a place among the king's retinue. Eliza noted his deference, his bow crisp as he delivered his message from the council, his voice betraying a hunger for favor that she met with her gentle, appraising gaze. Eliza found solace in her children. Arthur, now 11, whose betrothal to Catherine of Aragon, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, was a beacon of Tudor ambition. The Spanish alliance, pressed by her mother-in-law, Margaret Beaufort, gained urgency after Warbeck's defeat, countering his slanders of Tudor legitimacy. Eliza reviewed envoys' letters praising Arthur's health, ensuring the court dazzled for the Spanish ambassadors, with feasts under chandeliers of wax and roses, funded by her dower lands. Elizabeth Howard flitted amongst the guests, her youthful grace aiding Eliza's diplomacy, while Thomas Boleyn, ever observant, hovered near the councillors. His newness to court tempered a keen desire to rise. In the nursery, where Arthur read quietly and young Meg and Henry played, Eliza watched her son with pride and fear. Elizabeth Howard gently guiding Meg's hand with a toy in the chapel, where incense curled and stained glass glowed. Eliza's prayers were fervent for Arthur's strength, for Catherine's journey, for a crown untainted by rebellion. As winter bloomed, her resolve held firm, her love for her young son and her lost brothers weaving a vow to protect the Tudor legacy. By spring, as Greenwich Palace's gardens bloomed with tender green, Eliza carried another hope for the dynasty, her body gently rounding with a new child. Margaret Beaufort ensured preparations for the child, her wealth securing linens and a rose-carved cradle, while Eliza's dower lands funded physicians. Elizabeth Howard had noticed Thomas Boleyn, now a familiar figure, who carried council messages with growing confidence. His ambition noted by Eliza's watchful eye, her pregnancy became a symbol of continuity, countering rebellion's whispers. She oversaw the nursery's expansion, each kick of the child within strengthening her resolve. Her love for her growing family, a shield against the pain of her lost brothers and the threats circling the crown. In the somber fall of 1499, as Richmond Palace stood cloaked in November's chill mists, Eliza, Queen of England, moved through the torchlit halls with a grace shadowed by unspoken grief. At 33, her delicate features framed by blonde hair swept beneath a velvet hood bore the quiet strength of a queen who had woven her peace from a fractured past. The air, heavy with the scent of damp leaves and the acrid tang of wax from flickering candles, cast wavering shadows across the tapestries in her privy chamber. Roses and lions, embroidered in crimson and gold, stirred in the half-light, their heraldry a reminder of the Yorkist blood she carried and the Tudor union forged with Henry VII. The hearth's faint crackle couldn't banish the chill in her bones, a cold as much of the heart as of the season. Among her ladies, Elizabeth Howard, now 18 and newlywed to Thomas Boleyn, a rising courtier of 21, brought a quiet radiance to the chamber. Their marriage, celebrated in a modest ceremony, had united the ambitious Kentish knight with the poised Howard daughter, her youth tempered by sharp wit. She would have been out of his reach, but she was still recovering from her father's tattered reputation after taking the wrong side at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Their first child, Mary, a babe whose coos now echoed in the Howard household, a tender counterpoint to the court's tensions. Thomas, often seen near the council chamber, his polished manners and keen gaze marking his assent, bowed with practiced deference when delivering messages to Eliza, his new wife's loyalty to the Queen a bridge for his own ambitions. The summer shock of Perkin Warbeck's attempted escape from Woodstock Palace, crushed by a swift recapture, had stirred a tempest in Eliza's soul. Margaret Beaufort, her lady mother-in-law, delivered the news in her stern, measured tone, her dark robes and sharp eyes a constant in the Tudor court. Warbeck's flight, under the guise of a hunt, had fueled whispers of a Yorkist plot with Edward Plantagenet, Eliza's cousin, gnawing at Eliza's hope that her brother Richard might yet live. In November 1499, news of Warbeck's execution at Tyburn reached Richmond. A stone dropped into still water, hanged, his body a grim warning, his death aimed to sever Yorkist defiance. In her privy chamber, Eliza's embroidery lay idle, her needle glinting beside a half-stitched rose. Her pale fingers traced her rosary's worn beads, each a prayer for clarity, for peace, for an end to haunting questions. She felt no triumph. Had Warbeck been Richard, his confession coerced? The uncertainty gnawed at her. At her window, frost traced patterns on the glass, her breath clouding as she gazed at the dark Thames, the court buzzing with relief she couldn't share. Edward's execution 5 days later cut deeper. Beheaded on Tower Hill at 24, the Earl of Warwick's Plantagenet blood was deemed too dangerous. His charge? Conspiring with Warbeck. It felt like a veil over the truth. His lineage threatened Henry's dynasty. Eliza remembered Edward's shy, boyhood smile, her cousin, an echo of her father, Edward IV. She had stood with his sister, Maggie Pole, at Mary's christening. Now Maggie's restrained grief mirrored Eliza's. She couldn't comfort her cousin openly. Queenship demanded composure to steady a fractured court. In the chapel, where incense curled and stained glass glowed, Eliza knelt on cold stone, praying for Edward's soul, for forgiveness for the blood spilled for her children's future, and for strength to bear the crown's cost. The chapel's silence, broken by a distant bell, underscored peace's fragility. The Spanish alliance, Arthur's betrothal to Catherine of Aragon, shone as hope amid darkness hastened by Warbeck's defeat. Ferdinand and Isabella demanded stability, and Henry's ruthless efficiency delivered it. Yet Eliza ached for the cost of 2 lives, for her son's future. Arthur carried a scholar's poise, his thoughtful eyes like her lost brother's. She watched him in the great hall, bent over Latin texts, unaware of the shadows cleared for his throne. Elizabeth Howard, cradling thoughts of her newborn Mary, moved gently among the ladies, her loyalty a quiet support, while Thomas Boleyn, ever near the council, eyed the future. Eliza vowed to shield Arthur, her love for him and her lost brothers, weaving a silent resolve to protect the Tudor legacy. Each act a thread in a tapestry of endurance and hope. In the crisp dusk of autumn 1500, Elizabeth of York, Queen of England, moved through the oak-paneled halls of Greenwich Palace, her heart shadowed by a fresh wound. At 34, her golden hair, faintly threaded with silver, lay tucked beneath a gable hood, adorned with pearls, her eyes veiled by grief's quiet weight. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and damp leaves, drifting from the courtyard where her husband, King Henry, brooded over dispatches in the council chamber. But for Elizabeth, the palace's warmth was dimmed. Its tapestries of Tudor roses and Yorkist lions, a stark reminder of the dynasty she had helped forge, now scarred by loss. The faint rustle of rushes underfoot, strewn with dried lavender, mingled with the memory of a cradle now empty. In late June, her youngest son, Prince Edmund, barely 16 months old, had slipped from life, his small body overcome by a fever at Hatfield House. Born in February 1499, he had been a bright spark, his gurgles and tiny grasping hands a joy to Eliza, who had held him close through spring's promise. His death, swift and merciless, carved a hollow in her chest, joining the ache of her brother's vanishing in 1483 and the executions of Perkin Warbeck and her cousin Edward, Earl of Warwick, the previous November. She had worn a mask of queenship then, as now, but in her privy chamber, with her embroidery lay untouched, a half-stitched rose abandoned beside her silver needle. Mornings found her in the palace chapel, a cold stone steadying her as she knelt, her rosary beads clicking softly, their rhythm a tether to faith. The scent of incense wove through the air, curling around her as she whispered prayers for Edmund's soul, for her living children, Arthur, Margaret, Henry, and Mary, and for strength to bear the crown's unyielding toll. Her ladies, including Elizabeth Howard, now Elizabeth Boleyn, a young mother to little Mary, moved gently around her, their voices low as they offered spiced wine or smoothed her velvet gown. Elizabeth Boleyn's quiet loyalty, her careful hands arranging Eliza's prayer book, brought a fleeting comfort, though no words could mend a mother's grief. Afternoon saw Eliza walking in the gardens, where the Thames shimmered under a low autumn sun, its banks strewn with fallen leaves in hues of amber and crimson. She paused by a bed of fading white roses, their petals like those she once pressed into her brother's hands, her fingers trembling as she plucked one. Her children, unaware of the depth of sorrow, offered glimmers of light. Meg, weaving autumn grasses with Mary, their giggles a fragile echo, Harry, brandishing a wooden sword with a boyish fire, and Arthur, her hope for the throne, studying Latin with a scholar's calm, his betrothal to Catherine of Aragon, a beacon for the Tudor future. Yet each smile they gave pierced her, a reminder of the sun now gone. At night, in her chamber, Eliza stood by a window, the air sharp with the chill of wax from a single candle. A letter from her mother-in-law, Margaret Beaufort, lay open, its precise script urging prayers for Edmund and resolve to strengthen the Spanish alliance. Elizabeth's reply, penned with a steady quill despite her pain, spoke of duty, but veiled her heart's ache. She clutched a tiny linen cap, embroidered with Edmund's initials, its threads a faint echo of his warmth. The court, stirring with plans for Arthur's marriage, moved around her, but Eliza, queen and mother, bore her grief in silence, her strength a thread woven through the roses of a dynasty tempered by loss. In the high-ceilinged chamber at Greenwich Palace, where the tapestries of roses and saints glowed in the flickering light of a crackling fire, Eliza sat in a carved oak chair, her hands resting gently over a velvet cushion that eased the growing weight of her 6th pregnancy. At 35, her delicate features bore the quiet scars of 5 prior pregnancies, her body a testament to the Tudor dynasty's hopes and losses. The air held the scent of cedar smoke, and the faint sweetness of lavender from the rushes, a contrast to the court's relentless demands. Elizabeth and Thomas Boleyn's union had brought forth their daughter, Mary, a lively 2-year-old whose bright eyes were a new joy in the Boleyn household, and baby Anne, their presence whispered of fondly by Elizabeth as she served the Queen. Thomas, his ambition evident in his crisp bows and attentive presence near the council chamber, carried messages with a polish honed since his arrival at court in 1497, his Kent roots now entwined with the Howard lineage, bolstering his rise under Eliza's watchful eye. Their babies, Ladies Mary and Anne, would likely one day be ladies in waiting themselves, as had their mother and grandmother before them. Maybe to Eliza, maybe to the next queen. Eliza spent hours in the nursery, a panelled haven hung with embroidered cloths of St. George and the Tudor rose, teaching Meg, now 12, to stitch crimson silk roses. their giggles mingling with the sighs of impatience. Arthur, 15, studied nearby. His betrothal to Catherine of Aragon sealed in a proxy marriage that year, a triumph Eliza had nurtured through her diplomacy. In Westminster's great hall, its beams draped with red and white roses, she hosted Spanish envoys, her green damask gown shimmering as she offered spiced wine, her serene smile masking the ache of her past losses. Her son Edmund's death in 1500, a stark reminder of the throne's vulnerability. In the palace gardens, the scent of late roses evoked her mother, whose counsel to nurture peace had guided her. The gravel paths lined with yews offered solace as she walked, her hand resting on her belly, thoughts drifting to the child she carried, and the throne Henry had won at Bosworth 16 years prior. Eliza's Yorkist heritage tied her to her father Edward IV and her lost brothers. It was both a struggle and a burden. The executions of Perkin Warbeck and Edward Earl of Warwick in 1499 still lingered. Warbeck's false claim to be her brother Richard a cruel mockery. Edward's death a sacrifice of her cousin's Plantagenet blood. In the chapel, with stained glass casting jeweled light, Eliza knelt before a silver crucifix, her rosary beads slipping through her fingers as she prayed for Maggie. Elizabeth Boleyn, nearby, offered a gentle smile as she lit a candle, each prayer a vow to shield the Tudor legacy from the shadows of grief and rebellion. In the somber spring of 1502, as Ludlow's chill lingered in the air of Greenwich Palace, Eliza, Queen of England, sat by a firelit window, her fingers tracing the edge of a locket engraved with Arthur's name, her eldest son. At 36, her delicate features bore the weight of a mother's grief. The chamber, warmed by cedar logs and scented with the faint lavender from the rushes, held tapestries of roses and saints that flickered in the firelight, their silent heraldry a reminder of the Tudor legacy, now fractured by loss. Arthur Tudor, just 15, had been the Tudor heir, his marriage to Catherine of Aragon a beacon of hope, extinguished by the sweating sickness in April. The news from Ludlow, where he had died beside his young bride, struck Eliza like a blade, her heart hollowed by the memory of his scholarly poise and gentle smile, so like her lost brother's. Among her ladies, Elizabeth Boleyn, now 21, and a steadfast lady-in-waiting, and Agnes Howard, a 24-year-old, newly back at court and newly married to Elizabeth Boleyn's 59-year-old father. And now they were co-workers. Eliza's days wove mourning with duty, her love for her surviving children alight in the court's shadowed halls. In the nursery, she soothed Meg's quiet tears for Arthur, guided 10-year-old Henry's bold recitations to mask his confusion, and cradled 6-year-old Mary, whose chatter eased her pain. Each moment was a faint echo of the sorrow consuming her heart. King Henry, his face etched with resolve, came to her chamber, his hand resting on hers. "We will endure, my love," he murmured, speaking of young Harry as the new heir, his voice a shield against despair. Eliza, eyes brimming, nodded, drawing strength from him. That night she found him in the chapel, his stoic facade crumbling as he knelt, shoulders shaking with sobs for Arthur. Her soft steps echoed on the stone as she knelt beside him, her hand on his back, whispering, "We will bear this together, my king." Their tears mingled, their love a fragile anchor. Margaret Beaufort, her lady mother-in-law, orchestrated the court's response, her stern prayers a shield against despair, while Eliza corresponded with her cousin, Maggie Pole. Maggie's letter offered condolences, and Eliza, with Elizabeth Boleyn gently preparing her quill, replied with gratitude, her words cautious but distant, yet warm, binding their Yorkist hearts in a court wary of their bond. In the palace chapel, where incense curled and stained glass glowed, Eliza prayed for Arthur's soul. Elizabeth Boleyn, lighting a candle nearby, stood as a quiet pillar, her presence and tales of young Mary and Anne a soft reminder of hope, anchoring Eliza's resolve to protect her children and the Tudor legacy through a storm of grief. In the dim candlelit chamber of the Tower of London on February 11, 1503, Queen Eliza lay in her childbed, her strength ebbing like the Thames beyond the stone walls. Today was her 37th birthday. Her golden hair clung damply to her pale brow, her face exhausted with the strain of a 7th childbirth and the lingering grief for her eldest son Arthur, who had died only 10 months prior. The room was heavy with lavender and rosemary strewn to purify the air. Yet an oppressive stillness clung, broken only by her lady's soft murmurs and the distant tolling of the tower bells. Eliza, in a linen shift, clutched a small crucifix, having given birth on February 2 to Catherine, a frail daughter born prematurely, now in a cradle nearby, tended to by a wet nurse. The labor, grueling after 7 pregnancies, had left her weakened, her body faltering under sorrow and queenship demands. Her blue eyes, once uniting York and Lancaster, flickered with resignation, though her lips curved faintly for her attendants, ever the gracious queen. Among them Elizabeth Boleyn, now 22 and a devoted lady-in-waiting, her gentle hands adjusting Eliza's pillow, her face reflecting the weight of her own maternal joys, and the queen's fading light. King Henry was still back at Richmond Palace to avoid possible contagion. They didn't know what had caused the queen's fever. He sent letters of prayers and hope. Eliza's heart ached for him and their children, Margaret, betrothed to Scotland's king, Henry, the boisterous Prince of Wales, Mary, her golden-haired joy, and little Catherine, whose faint cries pierced her. She recalled Meg's proxy marriage the previous week, a triumph she had witnessed with pride, her strength already waning. Meg's small hand in hers, the ruby ring glimmering, warmed Eliza's heart, a reminder of the peace she had forged. Eliza's thoughts drifted to her mother, Elizabeth, whose fierce spirit she carried, and to Arthur, his gentle voice calling her now. Her ladies, including Elizabeth and Agnes, pressed cool cloths on her forehead, whispered prayers, and offered spiced wine. But the fever post-birth grew relentless. Elizabeth Howard, her eyes dim with worry, spoke softly of her children. Mary's bright laughter, a fleeting comfort in the somber chamber. Eliza murmured a prayer for her own children, her voice a whisper, asking the Virgin to guard them. The air grew heavier, candle wax weeping as if in mourning. Eliza's breathing slowed, her hands loosened around the crucifix. Her ladies knelt, rosaries clicking, as the priest's voice rose in solemn cadence. Elizabeth of York, the rose who bloomed in winter, slipped away, her heart stilled, leaving a court and a family to mourn a queen whose love had been their anchor. In that February of 1503, Eliza's death cast a shadow over the tower, her passing a quiet end to a life of grace and sacrifice. The bells tolled a dirge for a queen whose light had warmed England. Her newborn Catherine soon followed her into eternity, leaving Elizabeth Boleyn, Agnes Howard, in the bleak chill, a loss as profound as a mother's love. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com. Slide into my DMs on Facebook or Instagram at longlivethequeenpodcast, or join the party on Patreon, where we have extended episodes and bonus content.